we found in some of those situations that even with all the personality, if there's a mentality of getting started and building over time, they can still see a lot of tremendous gain over that 3 years. And the personality and the legacy can kind of shift as there's having successes in different parts of the business.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, we're going to have a great discussion here because I've already had a little bit of one. I'm here with Ryan Ruud, and we're going to be talking about complex B2B selling and making it simple. Talking about simplifying a lot of the things that you may be thinking, simplifying a lot of the tools that you may be using. And I think it's going to be an eye-opener for some people. It's going to contradict a lot of the things that you've probably heard and even refute and rebuke. But before we get into that, I would like him to share a little bit about his background and experience with us. So Ryan, if you could introduce yourself to the B2B DM gang.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be here. So my name is Ryan Ruud. I own a firm called Lake One. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our team is remote all over the U.S. I started Lake One 10 years ago. We are an accredited HubSpot solutions partner. Prior to starting Lake One, I ran marketing teams and B2B enterprise software companies. Way before that, I was pursuing a degree in journalism as a broadcast journalist. So I loved telling stories, realized that I could not make a living as a journalist, and took a hard right turn into marketing and marrying a love of technology and content. And that's where we are today.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Now, you and I had talked about a lot of the things over the past several years that, you are confronted with when you have organizations that are actually trying to do several things. And so there's a lot of things that they approach you with and ask. One of the things that you shared is, which we hear that's most common, is people in B2B organizations are like, how do we increase our leads?
Yeah.
And you had a really interesting perspective in regards to how you go about approaching that particular question that I don't think a lot of people do, but it becomes vital. So if you could share with me what you actually reply to with, or how you go about when people come to you and say, how do we increase our leads?
Yeah. So I always like to ask why. I like to ask multiple layers of questions in response. Why are leads down? Why are you needing to increase leads now? What happens if you don't do this? What's changed? I mean, lead volume doesn't just drop out of thin air. There's something that has happened, whether it's something within your organization, the way that you're communicating, something in the market. These are indicators that we should be paying attention to. So just saying, I need to increase leads, to me is always a red alert question, because that's usually a CEO or somebody on the C-suite saying we need revenue now. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the pain under the question so that we can figure out, what systems, what processes are breaking down. Because usually the systems that have been successful are just starting to break down a little bit, and we need to build those back up and figure out how do we get the engine running again.
Okay, so now this is really interesting because people are saying, hey, I want to increase leads. And you're saying, well, why do you want to increase leads? And it's like, what do you mean? Why do I? Of course I want to increase leads. But I see where you're going in regards to being able to peel these things back. I had a good friend of mine, well, she still is. She actually is a consultant that helps organizations put in customer service and customer experience type systems and customer care, and make sure that they're connected throughout the entire organization for, large customer service and customer care types of organizations. And she said, She turns away 95% of the people who come to her and are asking for her services. And I'm like, not 95%. She goes, and I asked her, I said, why is that? And why is the number so darn large? And she goes, a lot of times they come to me and they needed it fixed yesterday. I'm like, I can't help you.
Yep.
So how do you address that whole, urgency need? Because you and I talked before we started recording, and the fact is for all of us as human beings, and we fail to realize it, almost all of us, probably 100%, is that when we are under stress and duress and have a lot of anxiety, we make bad decisions.
100%. Yeah. So if, when that is the question that's coming to me, and there is clearly like the real thing that I need is just revenue now, and I'm not actually interested in addressing the underlying problem, we turn that away too, very much like your friend. But if they're willing to engage in the discussion and have the conversation and do the hard work, we start to uncover issues of like, hey, there was either some sort of change in leadership or something broke down where the process of acquiring a good fit prospect, qualifying them, handing them off to sales, working it, getting it into customer support, that system broke down. So we need to rebuild that. But we also have to be dedicated and committed to doing the work to build that back up again. We like to use a term called a revenue sprint, where we're consistently working on implementing that work on a 90-day basis, measuring it, iterating on it, improving it. Not saying after 90 days, if it's not back on track 100%, we're done, we're starting over. We're saying after 90 days, what part of this is starting to work? What part of this isn't? What can we learn from what's not working and improve on the next 90-day iteration? The key is just to continue working on it.
Okay. So then when I start thinking about this, and this is, what I was able to obtain from the information that you had provided to me, you had mentioned something about inbound marketing, account-based marketing, performance marketing, sales enablement.
Yep.
And so when we're thinking about this, I mean, it goes back into that whole marketing, sales, customer service, customer success, or client success areas and arenas. I mean, are you finding you're working across all of these different groups pretty much, in parallel?
So, yes is the answer, because usually what we're doing is we're bringing the whole revenue team to the table. So we've got marketing, sales, and support. And in order to fix the underlying issues behind the questions that we're getting asked about, we need all three parts at the table. What we usually end up finding is that one area is more broken than another one and needs a little extra TLC to get going, but they all have input. You can't really have a humming machine without all three people working together and having an agreement on what it is we're trying to accomplish, what the customer's needs are, what the business goals are. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in my line of work, I mean, we're a HubSpot partner, so we're bringing in software to solve a lot of these problems once the strategy is laid out. Unfortunately, what I see a lot of times is that those three functions aren't involved in the strategy setting, the software implementation, and you have one of them leading the charge, and then you end up with a set of tools and technology that are biased towards one portion of the revenue team and not the totality of the entire team.
Well, okay. So that kind of leads into the next question that you often get approached with, and where, the obvious, but yet not obvious response of, how do we increase leads, is people are like asking, associated with the whole revenue pieces, how do we increase revenue?
Yeah.
Again, very common question, and that's how people would ask it, but there's a lot more depth into it. So explain a little bit more. And I think you kind of were doing that just a second ago, talking about these three different groups when we consider revenue.
Yeah. So revenue is not a linear, like leads are very linear, right? A lead comes in from a source, you go to an event, fill out a form, they get qualified, they hit, your lead count. Revenue has a lot of levers, and that's why I really like when you have all three of those teams together, because there's a lot of ways to increase revenue. And especially at the C level, not all revenue is created equal. So there's revenue that has better margins associated with it. There's revenue that has a higher likelihood of renewing, all of that. So it's really understanding where from these three teams is the best opportunity to do that increase in revenue. It may not be that we need more leads. Leads might not be our problem. To your friend who is a customer success consultant, you may not have the support downstream to actually retain and keep happy customers. So you're just you have a really high acquisition cost to get leads that literally are going into a sieve. So you're just constantly bleeding money out the back end. So maybe the focus should be on, let's slow down the lead flow. Let's solve the leakage on the back end and figure out how we support and create a better customer experience back here. And that in itself will increase revenue.
Well, okay. So you bring up a really interesting debate that oftentimes gets played out, and people talk about the whole retention value component and element versus the sales component and element. Now, of course, the people who are the advocates in regards to the whole retention side will tell you that, it's X amount more to acquire a new customer than retain the existing. And then the ones who are on the a growth side of the business say, yes, but you'll never grow a darn thing unless you go and learn how to acquire better. So it's okay. So where is, really from your perspective, the proper dialogue associated with these two sides of the spectrum?
Yeah, so I think the dialogue is a yes and is that you have to have growth, but you also have to have retention and happiness. So you have to have a yes and conversation, just like when you have to get sales and marketing in alignment. You can't have like this debate about leads and about lead quality and like have the two teams pointing fingers at each other, because you're never going to be successful. So it extends all the way to the customer retention team as well. I think the other piece of it, though, is that there's also a customer marketing component that goes beyond just retention, but like how do you cross-sell, upsell, and grow the total number once you've acquired a customer, which is also a growth metric. That's a growth mechanism. That's not just, hey, we're keeping people happy. We need to now go into a new sales motion to grow that account.
Okay, so you also said a really interesting and compelling phrase a moment ago, and I want to actually dive into that. And you said something that they actually use in the improvisation world when they start, talking about keeping a conversation going and having fun with it, is that we always want to reply with yes and that's what you said. Yes and. And so, and I think this is where this comes into play when it clicked in my head. It's like, this is all about improvisation. I want to start with a strategy. I want to start moving forward with it. And then it's always a yes and, because I have to improvise.
Yeah.
So help us understand that a little bit when you start talking about getting hit with these types of questions, how we can flip people's thinking into being more iterative, being more thought-provoking, and helping with that yes and component.
I love that you identified that perspective. My background is also in theater, so I use some of those little limericks and those word rhetorical devices when I can. For me, it's all about open-ended questions. And what I find coming into organizations that have kind of this surface level thinking of, and usually there is some sort of anxiety that is built up, whether it's internally within the team, culturally, that, there's commissions, revenue, bonuses that are put on these teams, right? Like marketing is responsible for this, sales is responsible for this, support is responsible for this. And when you silo and put people into their corners and boxes, naturally there's going to be a very me, not a we looking perspective. It's easy for me to come in and my team to come in with an outside perspective and ask open-ended probing questions and go deeper than the leads for marketing, revenue for sales, and revenue for support or growth for support, because we don't have any skin in the game, so to speak. But encouraging the team to break down those barriers and respond in an open setting to those open-ended questions, the yes ands, and asking why is it that way? What if? Could this, how would that make your life better? Sales or marketing, how would that make your life better? And really starting to have that type of a dialogue where it's open and honest.
Well, also to think that whole weight that so many organizations are, bearing in what we were just talking about, and stress and anxiety and all that stuff, we're not going to think right. And it's important for us to know that if we're trying to help people to solve their problems, that is absolutely the first thing that we need to address. There's this whole human side of it, which to me is also kind of ironic when we start looking at, capturing, nurturing, retaining, all of that. It's all about the personal end out of it. And then from a technology perspective, we start talking about, mass customization and all these types of things that we attempt to do. And so then, people start talking about the whole growth piece. They come and they ask you questions. Okay, how do we increase leads? How do we increase revenue? Then ultimately they start looking at this overall growth question.
Yep.
And I would dare to say the aspirational elements of growth that you've seen are quite diverse. And I would also say in many instances, probably quite delusional. Even so, when I have conversations about ideal customer profiles, and people start telling me about their ideal customer profile, I'm like, that sounds like more like your ideal dream.
Yeah, totally.
So, we need to be a little bit more realistic here.
Yeah.
So when people come in and ask you the questions associated with how do we actually grow? How do we actually experience greater growth? What do you oftentimes approach or respond with in regards to that?
So it can be many things. I try to unpack what growth is to them, because I think that it's a very nebulous word. Growth can either be locations, like physical locations of the organization. It could be headcount, it could be revenue, it could be market share. I mean, growth. And all of those things have different types of components of how you're going to drive that growth, right? And downstream effects. So when they're saying we want to grow what? What kind of growth do you want to have? And what's interesting about it, especially with the clients that we've had long-term relationships with, is they've started to learn how we push back on our questions with them. So they come to us with, hey, I've got a manufacturing client that we've been with since 2018, and specific divisions will come and say, hey, we want to grow market share for this specific product in this specific region. Can we have a conversation and start strategizing how to do this? Yes, absolutely, because that is a very specific articulation of what growth means. And we can devise plans and resources around how we're going to do that. So for me, it's always narrow in the definition of what growth means.
Okay, so I would dare to say that when we start putting together the lead generation, we start talking about revenue and increasing revenue and rev gen. We start looking at the whole operational elements associated with all of those, marketing ops, sales ops. And then people are talking about doing it in an effort in order to be able to grow. They do start asking you also about, the tools and the technologies and things like that. And you said something I thought was quite compelling, coming from somebody, who helps organizations from a technology perspective. And you said we have way too much of it. What do you mean by that?
So we have way too much of it because the best marketers in the world all work for these dang companies. So they all do a really good job of making people think that the solution to all of their lead problems, their revenue problems, their growth problems is they just don't have the right technology. That's the problem. The technology is going to solve everything. And what I have found in 10 years of Lake One and in almost 20 years of total technology-driven marketing and sales is that the technology is usually not the problem. Having the wrong platform isn't the problem. The absence of really good strategy, process, and commitment to that process is the problem. And that they're having a belief that the tool or the technology is going to replace the lack of strategy and process is a recipe for spending a lot of money and not getting any results.
Well, and I think what you're saying and sharing is, I had this conversation and I did a podcast episode, and I started talking about what we have found in regards to the whole planning and execution component. And we follow a process called retrospective engineering. And it kind of cuts through a lot of the things that you and I were talking about and helping people get to the reality point. So it's like, okay, this is what we aspire to, and then actually working backwards from there. Because oftentimes what you'll find is you come to the conclusion, like you just said, this ain't a technology problem.
Yeah. No.
It's a people problem.
Yep.
It's a mindset problem. Yeah. It's a process problem. You know, and I mean, people are their worst enemy. I mean, we all are, right? Yeah. For me, for people who don't know, I'm a big dude. I'm 6'4", 235. I want to be 215. But, buying the ice cream and eating it at night at 10:30 help me get there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like, we're our own worst enemy.
Totally.
And we need to have, somebody come from outside and, us essentially subscribing, to the fact that we're gonna come, to some aha moments and have to do some self-reflection, because it's not all about buying a technology solution, dropping a coin in the slot,
Right.
and all of a sudden having it just spit something out. It's just not going to happen.
No, it's not. And I wish it was that easy. I mean, I wish the things that these companies sell us was that easy. I mean, I wish that the idea of lead generation was as simple as somebody does a Google search, they find you, they come to your website, they submit a form, and 2 days later they sign $100,000 agreement with you. I wish it was, but we all know that that is not the reality of any of it. It is far more complex than that. And the idea that there is some platform out there that makes it that simple is nonsense.
Well, like you said, some of the best marketers in the world are working for those companies, and they're making you believe that it is. Hold on, let me do that again. But as you said, some of those marketers that are the best in the world are working for those companies and making you believe that it is.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But okay, so if I start looking at, and you and I had talked about this, we get met with a lot of these common questions that with what people know at this current, given time within, the organization, their quest and their thoughts in regards to solving what they're trying to solve for. You were going through and explaining, well, I asked these questions, this, that, and that and the other. What are some of the best questions that you have found that you've come back with that allowed you to have information opened up to you that you otherwise weren't obtaining?
That's a fantastic question right there. So one of my favorite questions, especially like as we're doing discovery and we're trying to put strategy together that will eventually be executed with a tool, with a CRM or marketing automation, is because we live in a world where everything is digital, right? And we think everything that business does has to be driven digitally. And this is going to be the digital guy that's going to ask this question. If the internet didn't exist, how would you get leads? How would your business thrive? How would you be driving your business forward? Because it forces people to stop thinking about the same tired tactics and start thinking about, well, I'd probably be in, business networking groups, industry networking groups. I'd be doing things, face to face. and actually doing things that are building relationships? And I find that question gets people talking and realizing how simple this all really is and how complicated we're all making it by having all of this other noise on top of it. And that's probably one of my favorite questions to ask.
That's a great question, because it gets back to what we were talking about in regards to the whole, relationship elements associated with doing business. And in a complex selling situation, it's really the relationships that will carry it forward and accelerate it or not. And the research is showing that now is that most sales are lost to no decision. Well, why are they lost to no decision? Well, I don't trust you buggers that are out there trying to solve this thing for me.
100%. 100%. And I don't need another, I came across your profile on LinkedIn and I'd love to connect. I'm like, yeah, it's so depersonalized.
Very much so. But we're not saying to do away with, the digital elements of it. It's just,
Right.
Hey, let's make sure that we still stay grounded in what our base should be.
Totally.
It's kind of funny that you say that. Many, many, many years ago, when I was just a young lad, I started working for one of the largest convenience store companies in the state of Tennessee. And I came in, I had a retail background at the time, and they had all of these point of sale systems and electronic systems, and they didn't have any backup redundancies. And I'm like, whoa, while you may not be able to pump gas, if something happens with your systems, you still have a whole lot of stuff in this store that you could be selling. And where's your profit margin? It's inside. It ain't at the pump. So I actually implemented some, backup, point of sale types of processes and stuff. And sure enough, 3 days later, the system goes down for every single one of their stores, and it was down for 3 days.
Wow.
And we were in operation the entire time. Couldn't sell any gas, but man, we had all kinds of stuff inside that was being sold. And so we weren't just totally, wiped out for those 3 days. But I think that's that story. To me, it just connected when you were saying what you were saying in regards to, okay, well, what if it all went away? What would you do?
Yeah, exactly. You have to it's the little house on the prairie mindset is kind of the way I think of it. So.
Okay, so now we finally have essentially cracked through their shell of either worry and anxiety or innocent unknowing, and so now we're getting to the point to where we're taking things to the next level, and we're going through and as you say, you work with organizations pretty hand in hand, become part of the organization. Where oftentimes do you find this whole issue of transformation comes into play when you're working within an organization?
So I think there's a few different areas where I see the blockers come rear their ugly head, I should say. So there's the perfection blockers that I see a lot of times. There's organizations or people within organizations that have a perception that every I has to be dotted and every T has to be crossed before anything can happen, which is especially in industries that are getting disrupted by startups, terrifying, because you have to be moving. If you're not moving, you're dead. So I always have this, and I've had clients that have literally printed this and made art in their office after hearing me say this, is progress over perfection. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to be making progress, because otherwise you're not iterating and you're a sitting duck. So that's a big one. The other area where there's a lot of a big blocker will come in is if there wasn't buy-in. So the three seats of the revenue team, if there is a blocker within that, and for some reason that person isn't swayed over, there has to be at the leadership level buy-in to be able to get it to roll out within the whole organization. And that's probably the biggest one that we run into, is that there's a sales leader that is somewhat skeptical of the whole thing and goes along with it and is fine, but they're always kind of secretly sabotaging it or something.
That passive aggressive one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so, and I would dare to say, when you are going through an evaluation process yourself, is that you get an understanding of who those people are from the conversations and the
Oh, yeah.
components, and then just the overall, behavior of the organization. But I wonder if, your evaluation process means, nope, don't want to work with them when you have a situation where you've identified it, that it is that top person, that CEO, that's that blocker.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There have been situations like that where we've declined work because we've had great conversations with others on the team, and then it comes down to somebody that ends up just, it could be the CEO, it could be a CF, somebody in that seat, where it's clear that they have no interest in supporting it. And it doesn't bring me any pleasure to turn it down. It's the reason we do it is because we don't want to tie ourselves to something that we know is going to be unsuccessful and is going to be a terrible experience for all of those other people that are really enthusiastic about the transformation.
Well, yeah, I would dare to say too, I mean, even when you look at it, your own people, your people, when they're having to work, in an organization like that, that's not fair to them.
No, no.
Okay, so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at all these questions that get asked, all of this clarity that needs to occur, and then I start thinking about these. I mean, I could be sitting here and saying, "Hey, not a whole lot of historical or legacy issues for this particular organization." Hey, things are looking pretty good in regards to the whole collaboration piece. You may be looking at, 6-8 months worth of activity in order to be able to start seeing some significant gains. But you guys, whole lot of legacy, a whole lot of complexity, a whole lot of personality. You're looking 3 years. Is that about right? What you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, it can be all over the gap. What I would say too, with like the 3-year ones, is what I found is that even if they have a whole lot of legacy, I love the caveat of personality, is that we found in some of those situations that even with all the personality, if there's a mentality of getting started and building over time, they can still see a lot of tremendous gain over that 3 years. And the personality and the legacy can kind of shift as there's having successes in different parts of the business. So sure, the folks listening might be like, holy crap, I have 3 years to have any sort of value creation out of a digital transformation over the entire organization, perhaps, but there may also be smaller gains that are realized, whether it's automating processes that take your team, tons of hours every month to do something manually, or like those little wins start adding up as well.
All right, so let's talk about something that oftentimes people just are unaware of. It's just not on their radar screen. And that is the fact that when you start looking at people in the marketplace, actually working within organizations, the turnover across all the marketplace is anywhere from 20 to 25% annually. So that means I'm sitting here and I'm looking at all these people on these teams that have to be part of this knowledge share and transfer, as well as the execution component. And then I've got these people who are just leaving. How the heck do I keep things going?
That's a great question. We always encourage, as part of this transformation process, that you have an internal person that is kind of the champion, and you work on documentation, and that you treat the transformation not as a one-time thing, that you transform, you put the tools in, document the process, and you're done. That it's constantly something that you're iterating on, evolving, and you keep like a living documentation of it. Some of our clients have internal knowledge bases, some just have standard operating procedures, but it's something so that as people come and go, they can hit the ground running. I think, anybody that has worked in sales and marketing in the last 15 years has gone into an organization and they're like, oh, and there's our Salesforce, there's our HubSpot. It's the most dreaded thing ever to be like, go figure out the CRM that we've had for 50 years and nobody has managed, right? But as long as you have somebody that is charged with championing it and being responsible for the governance of it, and documenting it, it becomes a lot easier.
Okay. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about organizations that are the most successful, because here's the thing that's often interesting, talking about some of those best marketers in the world, whether it's, HubSpot, whether it's heck, you and I, whether it's whoever the case may be.
Yep.
They're going to always talk about, here, this particular organization had success in doing this, right? That's what we all do. It's what we're supposed to do. It's what, prospects and customers, that's what they're looking for. So let's just set aside, as far as that's concerned, that it's a must do, right? Table stakes. But if I'm going to say, okay, my client showcases, if I look at them, they share some common characteristics. What are they?
So they have, they're either replacing outdated legacy systems. So there's an understanding of, we need to catch up and we need to pick our head up and look at the landscape of technology that is out there to support business today. There is a leader, and it's interesting because I always have my team asking, like, who is the decision maker in our businesses, in our client prospect businesses? I couldn't tell you, because in some cases it's the president, it's the CEO, it's the CMO, it's the CEO, but in every single case there is somebody that is forward thinking enough to understand the value of a unified customer journey and data set that ties their team together, and that their team actually wants to engage in a platform to do their work, and that they are like that champion. When I'm talking about a champion across our showcase of customers, that champion is usually C-suite. And that champion believes in it so much and believes so vehemently that the future of their business is having a really strong technical foundation tied to their business processes, their goals, and doing the hard work, digging deeper than the surface level questions. That is a very, very common thread through all the showcases in our book.
Well, one of the things I think for me that stood out in all of that and finding those common characteristics is there is a whole lot of pre-work that has to be done that oftentimes just either isn't, or oftentimes just gets lost. And we have to always go back and do that pre-work. It's kind of like, and to me, hey, we go to the doctor and then we have our annual checkups to make sure that we're staying healthy. And so that whole, consistency and repetitiveness and, keeping our freshness so our heads don't get down, is critical.
Very. Yep.
Okay. So man, we went through a whole lot of, different aspects associated with being able to increase, leads when those questions come to play, increase revenue, be able to focus in on growth, the common characteristics of what, success looks like, the whole fallacies associated with technology fixing the problem. But if you had one thing you'd like to leave the B2B DM gang with, kind of rolling it up, what would it be?
Well, it's interesting that we started this conversation with the simplicity component, and then we got complex, because I think the kind of the ending point is that in order for us to get simple in our work, like to make the sales process simple, easy, marketing simple, easy. And I'm not talking just for like those of us that are the practitioners of it, but also for our prospects. Like we want to reduce friction out of that whole experience. And we don't want them being like, ugh, that's the email I got. Ugh, that's the LinkedIn message I got. Total turn off. In order for us to do that as business people, we have to do the hard work of digging deep into, what is it that we want to be doing? How is it that we want to be showing up for our prospects and our customers, and then architecting those systems.
Ryan Ruud, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. How does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, super active there. So send me a note there. Otherwise, check us out at lakeone.io.
Ryan Ruud, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.